I lied for a living. That's not something I ever thought I'd say out loud. But here I am. For over a decade, I worked in an industry that shapes how you see the world, controls what you believe, and decides what matters, and what doesn't. You trust it. You rely on it. You think it exists to inform you, to give you the truth. But that's the biggest lie of all. I was a journalist. Not the kind you see in movies, the ones who chase down corrupt politicians, uncover deep conspiracies, and bring justice to the world. No, my job was much simpler. I wrote news. Fast, engaging, viral. I took the raw, messy, complicated reality of the world and twisted it into something clean, consumable, and, sometimes, completely fake. And I was good at it. It wasn't always like this. I started my career believing in journalism. I believed that facts mattered, that truth was sacred, that my work was important. But over the years, I learned the dirty little secret of this industry, the one no one wants you to know. The truth doesn't sell. You see, real news is messy. It's boring. It's complicated. A breaking story doesn't come wrapped in a perfect narrative with heroes and villains. It's a jumble of conflicting reports, unclear motives, and unanswered questions. But no one wants that. They want a headline that grabs them in seconds. They want a story that makes them feel something: anger, fear, hope, outrage. And that's where we came in. It started small. A little exaggeration here. A slightly misleading headline there. Just to make it more engaging, my editor would say, "We're not lying, we're just framing the truth." But the more I did it, the more I saw the game for what it really was. Because once you start bending the truth, where do you stop? I'll never forget the first time I wrote something I knew wasn't true. It was a slow news day. We needed clicks. The pressure was on. My editor tossed a half-baked story onto my desk, a vague report about a celebrity possibly being involved in a scandal. No proof. No solid sources. Just speculation. "Make it work," he said. And so I did. I played with the words, made it sound just uncertain enough to protect us legally, but dramatic enough to go viral. And it did. Within hours, it was everywhere. People were outraged. They demanded answers. And the truth? The truth didn't matter. By the time we issued a small correction days later, the damage was done. That was the moment I realized this wasn't journalism. It was storytelling. And the best story always wins. But here's the part that should scare you. I wasn't working for some shady tabloid. I worked for a legitimate, respected news outlet. The kind you trust. The kind you turn to when you want the facts. But behind the scenes, it was all the same game. Because in modern journalism, facts don't drive the news cycle, emotion does. Fear, outrage, shock. Those are the real currencies of the industry. And once you start seeing the patterns, you can never unsee them. The carefully chosen words that make a story seem bigger than it is. The selective omission of details that don't fit the narrative. The way a headline can twist reality in just a few words. And the worst part? We weren't just manipulating the truth. We were manipulating you. I know that sounds dramatic, but think about it. When was the last time you clicked on a news story that didn't make you feel something? When was the last time you questioned whether what you were reading was really the full story? Most people don't. And that's exactly why this works. Because the moment you let your emotions take over, anger, fear, excitement, you stop thinking critically. You react. You share. You spread the story without even realizing that you're part of the machine. And I was one of the people feeding it. I don't know why I'm telling you this now. Maybe because I need to believe that it's not too late. That people can still wake up. That we haven't all become slaves to the algorithm, to the outrage, to the never-ending cycle of manufactured drama. Or maybe I just need someone to hear me. Because once you see how the news is really made, you can never trust it the same way again. And trust me, this is only the beginning. I didn't set out to become part of the machine. I was just a girl from a small town, raised on the kind of stories that made journalists seem like heroes. You know, the ones where a fearless reporter uncovers a government conspiracy, exposes corruption, risks everything for the truth. That's what I thought journalism was. That's what I wanted it to be. I wasn't born into wealth. My parents were regular people. My dad worked at a factory, my mom in a grocery store. We weren't poor, but we weren't comfortable either. We lived paycheck to paycheck, just trying to get by. College was a dream I had to fight for, scraping together scholarships, working late shifts at a diner. But I made it. I got my degree in journalism. And when I landed my first real job at a news agency, I felt like I had finally made it. Back then, my world was simple. I lived in a tiny apartment that barely fit a bed and a desk. I drank too much coffee, survived on instant ramen, and spent my nights glued to my laptop, dreaming of my big break. I wasn't trying to be famous. I just wanted to tell stories that mattered. To give people the truth. At first, everything felt exactly how I imagined it would. The newsroom was electric, phones ringing, reporters shouting across the room, the constant buzz of breaking news. I was the new girl, the one who fetched coffee, fact-checked articles, and stayed late hoping someone would notice me. And eventually, they did. I remember my first real assignment. It wasn't glamorous, a simple human interest piece about a local teacher retiring after 40 years. But I poured my heart into it. I interviewed former students, dug up old photos, crafted a story that made people feel something. When it was published, I felt proud, like I had done something real. That feeling didn't last. Because the longer I worked in this industry, the more I started to notice things. Little things at first. Headlines that didn't quite match the story. Editors pushing for a stronger angle, even when the facts didn't support it. Reporters choosing which details to highlight and which to leave out. I told myself it was normal. Just part of the job. After all, no story is completely neutral. There's always a choice in how you tell it. But then came the deadlines. The quotas. The pressure to make every article engaging. That's the word they used, engaging. Not accurate. Not fair. Engaging. Because at the end of the day, it wasn't about the truth. It was about the numbers. The clicks. The shares. The outrage. And the more I played along, the more I realized this wasn't journalism. It was entertainment. I wish I could say there was a single moment that changed everything. A moment where I saw the industry for what it really was. But it wasn't like that. It was gradual. Like boiling a frog. One day, I was writing real news. The next, I was bending a headline just a little. Then a little more. Until one day, I looked at the words on my screen and realized I wasn't reporting facts anymore. I was crafting a story. And people believed it. That was the scariest part. They believed every word. I started to see the patterns. How the same techniques were used over and over again. The words chosen to provoke fear. The statistics manipulated to fit a narrative. The way certain events were blown out of proportion, while others were buried completely. And the worst part? It worked. Every single time. Because the truth? The truth is, no one wants a headline that says everything is fine, nothing to worry about. They want chaos. They want scandal. They want a villain to hate, a hero to root for, a story that makes them feel something. And we gave it to them. I told myself it wasn't that bad. That I was just doing my job. That I wasn't the one making the decisions. I was just following orders. But deep down, I knew. I knew exactly what we were doing. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. Because here's the truth no one wants to admit. Journalism isn't about informing you. It's about controlling you. And I was part of it. But the worst was yet to come. I don't remember exactly when I first felt it, that nagging sense that something wasn't right. Maybe it was the day I saw an article I didn't write, with my name on it. At first, I thought it was a mistake. A simple mix-up in the byline. It happens, right? But when I read it, my stomach turned. Because the article wasn't just exaggerated, it was completely fabricated. It was about a protest. According to the story, a group of activists had clashed violently with police, resulting in multiple injuries. It was framed as chaos, as an uprising, as the city on the verge of spiraling out of control. But I had covered that protest. I had been there. And I knew for a fact that it had been peaceful. A few heated arguments, some chanting, but no violence. No arrests. Nothing close to what this article described. I stared at my name beneath the headline, my heart pounding. Had I written this? Had I somehow twisted the facts without realizing it? I went back through my notes, replayed the footage I had taken. No, I hadn't made a mistake. This wasn't my story. Someone had rewritten it. Someone had turned a calm, peaceful demonstration into a riot because chaos sells. I walked straight into my editor's office, the printed article clenched in my fist. "This isn't my writing," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. He barely looked up from his computer. We made a few adjustments. It needed a stronger angle. A stronger angle. That's what they called it. A way to make the story more engaging, more urgent, more clickable. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say something, anything. But then I saw it. The screen of his monitor opened to our analytics page. The article was trending. Thousands of shares, comments, reactions. It was one of the top-performing stories of the day. And that's when I understood. It didn't matter if it was true. It mattered that it worked. That was the first time I felt the weight of what we were doing. But it wasn't the last. Because once you start seeing the cracks, you can't stop. I started noticing things I should have seen long before. Stories that changed in the editing process, shifting their tone, their focus, their entire meaning. Statistics that were adjusted to make a point. Sources that weren't as solid as they seemed. And then, the disappearances. Not of people, of articles. One day, an investigative piece would be published, full of damning evidence, real research, undeniable facts. And then, without warning, it would be gone. Deleted. As if it had never existed. No explanation, no correction, just a quiet erasure. I wasn't the only one who noticed. A colleague of mine, someone I respected, had spent weeks on a major piece exposing financial corruption in a powerful corporation. He had sources, documents, proof. It was airtight. The kind of story that could actually make a difference. It was published on a Monday morning. By Monday night, it was gone. Wiped from our site, removed from archives, no mention of it anywhere. When I asked him what happened, he just shook his head. Legal issues, he muttered. We can't talk about it. And that's when I really started to feel it. The fear. Because if stories could disappear, if facts could be erased, if narratives could be rewritten, then what else was being controlled? I didn't have an answer. Not yet. But I was starting to realize I wasn't just working in the news. I was working in something else entirely. And I had no idea how deep it went. I couldn't let it go. The protest story. The disappearing articles. The quiet erasures of inconvenient truths. It was all gnawing at me, a whisper at the back of my mind that grew louder with each passing day. I started paying closer attention, watching the way stories evolved from raw facts to polished narratives, how certain details were emphasized while others were conveniently left out. It wasn't just about twisting headlines anymore. It was bigger, more deliberate. And the deeper I looked, the worse it got. One evening, long after most of the newsroom had emptied out, I stayed behind, scrolling through our archives. I was looking for that deleted corruption piece, the one my colleague had worked on for weeks. It was gone, wiped from our official site, but I knew better than to trust a surface-level search. I dug deeper. Internal servers, cached pages, digital footprints that shouldn't have been erased so easily. And then, buried under layers of redirects and dead links. I found it. But it wasn't the article I remembered. The byline was missing. The language had been softened. The accusations had been replaced with vague insinuations. Names had been removed. The article was still there, but it had been gutted, stripped of everything that made it dangerous. Someone had rewritten history. And the worst part? No one had said a word. No explanation, no announcement. The truth had simply been edited into something safer. Something that wouldn't cause problems. I leaned back in my chair, a cold weight settling in my stomach. This wasn't just about engagement, about clicks, about making news more exciting. This was control. Someone was deciding what the public was allowed to know. And then I heard it. A faint shuffle behind me. I turned, my pulse spiking, but the newsroom was empty. The overhead lights buzzed softly, the glow of computer screens casting eerie shadows across the desks. I was being paranoid. That's what I told myself. But when I logged out and stood to leave, I noticed something strange. My desk. The papers on it weren't how I had left them. My notepad, where I had scribbled thoughts about the protest story, was slightly askew, flipped open to a page I didn't remember leaving it on. Someone had been at my desk. I scanned the room again, my heart hammering against my ribs. Was someone watching me? Was I imagining things? I shoved my notepad into my bag, grabbed my coat, and left without another glance. That night, I couldn't sleep. Lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, I kept replaying everything in my mind. The protest story, the fake byline, the deleted article, the silent edits. And now, someone going through my desk. I needed answers. The next morning, I went straight to my colleague, the one whose article had disappeared. He looked exhausted, dark circles under his eyes, his usual sharpness dulled. I hesitated before speaking, lowering my voice. What happened to your story? He tensed. Just slightly, but I noticed. His eyes darted toward the editor's office before he forced a smile. Legal issues, he said again, the same vague excuse. That's bullshit, I whispered. I found it. It's still online, rewritten. His expression didn't change, but I saw something flicker in his eyes. Fear. You shouldn't be looking for that, he muttered. Just let it go. Let it go. I stared at him, searching his face for some kind of explanation. He had always been one of the best journalists I knew, relentless, fearless. But now, he looked like a man who had already lost. What did they say to you? I asked. He exhaled slowly, rubbing his temples. It's not worth it, he murmured. Trust me. But that only made me more determined. Because if he was afraid, then something was very, very wrong. I should have let it go. I should have done what he said, kept my head down, filed my stories, and stopped asking questions. But I couldn't. Because once you realize you're being lied to, once you see the cracks in the foundation, you can't just pretend they aren't there. You start questioning everything. You start wondering how deep it goes. And then, eventually, you find out. It happened late one night when I was alone in the newsroom again. I was careful this time. No unnecessary searches on my work computer, no notes left out in the open. I needed real proof, something undeniable, something that couldn't just be deleted or rewritten. I started where I always started, the archives. But this time, I wasn't looking for missing stories. I was looking for patterns. And that's when I saw it. Every major scandal, every corruption story that had ever been quietly removed or rewritten, they all had one thing in common. The same names. The same corporations. The same powerful figures slipping through the cracks over and over again. At first, it seemed random, just a coincidence. But then I checked the timestamps. The stories weren't just disappearing. They were being erased before they could even make it to publication. Some were killed minutes before going live. Others were rewritten so fast that the original versions never even had a chance to be seen. The deeper I dug, the more I realized it wasn't just happening at my news agency. It was happening everywhere. Newsrooms across the country, articles pulled, headlines changed, stories buried before they could gain traction. And behind it all, the same names, the same hands pulling the strings. I felt sick. Because this wasn't just about one bad editor. This wasn't just my company. This was the industry itself. A system built not to inform, but to manipulate. To shape reality, to decide what people saw, what they believed, what they feared. And I had been a part of it. I leaned back in my chair, my pulse hammering in my ears. I knew what this meant. I knew what I had just uncovered. And then, my screen went black. For a second, I thought it was a glitch. A power surge. But then a message appeared, white text against the darkness. Access denied. And just like that, Everything I had been looking at was gone. The archives, the articles, the records, all of it wiped in an instant. I pushed back from my desk, my breath coming too fast. This wasn't just a coincidence. Someone had been watching. Someone knew what I was doing. I grabbed my bag, my hands shaking as I shut down my computer. I needed to get out. I needed to think. But as I reached for my phone, it buzzed in my hand. An unknown number. I hesitated before answering. Silence. And then a voice. Low. Cold. You should stop. I felt ice crawl down my spine. The call ended. I stood there, phone still pressed to my ear, my heart pounding so hard I thought I might be sick. I wasn't just onto something. I had been seen. And now, I wasn't sure if I could get out. I left the office that night with my stomach in knots, my breath coming in shallow, uneven gulps. The city was quiet, the streets washed in the cold glow of streetlights, but nothing felt normal anymore. I was being watched. I could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes tracking my movements, the paranoia creeping into every shadow. I walked faster, my fingers gripping my phone so tightly they ached. The unknown call played on a loop in my mind. You should stop. It hadn't been a threat, not directly. But the meaning was clear. Someone knew what I had found. And they wanted me to forget it. I should have walked away, wiped my hands clean of all of it. Pretended I never saw the patterns, never connected the dots, never realized how deep the deception went. But it was too late for that. Because now I understood, this wasn't just about censorship, about corporate influence. This was control on a level I hadn't even begun to comprehend. And the moment I saw it, I became a problem. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my apartment, staring at my laptop, debating whether to dig deeper or destroy everything I had found. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to pretend none of this had happened, to go back to my safe, ignorant life. But then I thought about the stories that had disappeared, the voices that had been silenced, the truths that had been twisted into lies. How many people had tried to expose this before me? And where were they now? A fresh wave of nausea rolled through me. I opened my laptop, fingers hovering over the keys. If they had erased the archives, they could erase me too. My career, my reputation, even my name. If they wanted to, they could make me disappear, not physically, maybe, but digitally. And in this world, wasn't that the same thing? I had to be careful. I started with backups. Everything I had found, every article, every name, every connection, I saved copies, encrypted files, sent them to multiple locations. Just in case. And then, against every survival instinct I had, I did the one thing I shouldn't have done. I called my colleague, the one who had warned me to stop. He picked up on the third ring. You shouldn't be calling me, he said, his voice tight. I didn't answer right away. I could hear something in his tone. Something I didn't like. Are you okay? I asked finally. Silence. And then, I can't talk about this. A chill ran down my spine. They got to you, didn't they? He let out a sharp breath. You think this is a game? You think you're the first one to dig too deep? His voice was shaking now. They don't threaten you. They don't need to. They just erase you. A cold, sinking feeling settled in my chest. What do you mean? They make sure no one believes you. They twist your words, discredit you, destroy your credibility before you even open your mouth. And if that doesn't work, they find other ways. A long pause. And then, barely a whisper. I should have stopped when they warned me. The line went dead. I sat there, gripping my phone, my entire body rigid with dread. He wasn't afraid of being killed. He was afraid of something worse. Being erased. Discredited. Made to look insane, unreliable. His life, his work, his reputation, all of it gone, as if he had never existed. And now, I was next. I stared at my laptop, my own words staring back at me. The files, the evidence, the truth I had uncovered. I had two choices. Walk away, or expose it all. Either way, I knew one thing for certain. They were already watching me. I knew they were coming for me before it even happened. The signs were subtle at first. My email login suddenly not working. My keycard failing at the office. A strange notification on my bank account about an unusual transaction, one I never made. It was all small, almost insignificant. Easy to brush off. But then, the messages started. Not threats. Not warnings. Smears. Anonymous accusations spreading online, claims that I had fabricated sources, manipulated data, doctored quotes. My credibility, my work, my name, being picked apart, piece by piece. Articles I had written suddenly flagged as inaccurate. Old tweets dug up, twisted out of context. The slow, methodical process of erasing me had begun. And that's when I realized, this wasn't about stopping me. It was about making sure no one would believe me. Because the most effective way to silence someone isn't to threaten them. It's to make sure no one listens. I had no more time. I had to act. I packed my bag, laptop, hard drives, everything I had backed up. I wasn't going to run. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to publish everything. I had a plan. I'd send the files to multiple independent journalists, leak the information online, make it impossible to contain. Once it was out, they couldn't erase it. The truth would spread too fast. But they were already one step ahead. The moment I left my apartment, I saw the car. Black. Unmarked. Parked just far enough down the street to look inconspicuous. I kept walking. Pretended I didn't notice. My heart was slamming against my ribs, but I forced myself to stay calm. Then another one. Across the intersection. Engine running. I turned the corner, my fingers tightening around the strap of my bag. I wasn't being paranoid. I was being followed. I ducked into a crowded cafe, forcing myself to breathe. My hands trembled as I pulled out my phone. I needed to send the files. Now. But the moment I opened my encrypted email, the screen glitched. Then, no internet connection. I stared at my phone, pulse hammering. I switched to data. Nothing. A black void where my signal used to be. Then, my laptop. I opened it, clicked the folder containing every file I had gathered, every article they had buried, every connection they thought no one would see. File not found. I blinked. Clicked again. Empty. Everything gone. I checked my backup drive. Plugged it in. Opened it, searched desperately. Corrupted. Unreadable. I felt the blood drain from my face. They had wiped me. Not just online. Not just my reputation. My evidence. My proof. Everything. They had been inside my system. Watching. Waiting. And the moment I made my move, they erased everything I had. I swallowed hard, gripping the table. My mind was racing. I still had my notes. My memories. They couldn't delete those. I could still expose them if I got out. I glanced at the window. The black car was still there. They weren't going to let me. I reached for my bag, trying to steady my breath. I needed to move. I needed a new plan. But before I could stand, a shadow fell over my table. Someone was standing next to me. A man in a dark suit, his expression neutral, unreadable. I didn't know him, but I knew exactly who he was. "I think you should come with me," he said. It wasn't a request. I looked around. The cafe was full of people. Normal people, drinking coffee, talking, laughing, completely unaware that my world was collapsing around me. I could run. I could scream. But somehow I knew it wouldn't matter. They had already won. Because the truth isn't just about what you know. It's about who's willing to believe you. And they had made sure that no one ever would. They didn't take me to a police station. They didn't take me to some secret underground facility where whistleblowers disappear. No, that would have been too obvious. Too dramatic. Instead, they took me back to the office. My own newsroom. The place where this had all started. I sat in a cold conference room, across from a man I had never met before. He wasn't my editor. He wasn't anyone I had ever seen working here. But the way he carried himself, the way he sat with that quiet authority, like he had already won, told me exactly who he was. One of them. He slid a folder across the table. Inside were printed screenshots, old emails, notes I had written, evidence that I had been digging into stories I shouldn't have been, that I had tried to leak files, that I had attempted to expose something bigger than I even realized. I forced myself to meet his gaze. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady despite the adrenaline surging through my veins. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. "I think the better question is, what do you want?" I frowned. "You could fight this," he continued, tapping the folder with one finger. "Go public. Tell the world what you think you know. And maybe, just maybe, some people would listen." I swallowed, my mouth dry. Or, you walk away." His tone was casual, almost conversational, like he was offering me a choice. But there was no choice. I already knew what would happen if I went public. I had seen it before. The smear campaigns, the hit pieces, the way lives were dismantled one accusation at a time. No one would believe me. No one could believe me, not once they were done with me. And even if I somehow survived the fallout, what would it change? The system was too big, too well-oiled. This wasn't just one news outlet, one corporation, one entity controlling the narrative. It was everything. I had been naive to think I could take it down. I exhaled slowly, my fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "If I walk away, what happens to me?" His smile didn't change. "You keep your life. Your job, if you want it. A different role, maybe. One where you don't ask so many questions." I clenched my jaw. I wanted to scream, to throw the folder in his face, to demand justice, to do something. But what could I do? They had erased my work. They had erased my proof. They had erased everything. And now they were offering me a way out. A quiet way out. I thought about my colleague, the way his voice had shaken when he warned me to stop. I thought about all the stories that had vanished before mine. I thought about the call that had started all of this. "You should stop." I stood up. His eyes followed me, waiting for my decision. I reached for the folder. And then, slowly, deliberately, I tore it in half. A flicker of something, amusement, crossed his face. "I don't need your permission to stop," I said quietly. I walked out of that room, out of that building, out of the career I had spent my entire life working for. Because I knew the truth now. The news wasn't about truth. It was about control. And I had two options: stay and become part of it, or leave and accept that I would never be heard again. I chose to leave. But even now, I wonder, was that really my choice? Or was it just another illusion? I thought leaving would set me free. That once I walked away, I could forget, move on, start over. I was wrong. Because once you see how the world really works, you can't unsee it. I spent the first few weeks in a daze, wandering the city, watching the news like a stranger, like someone seeing it for the first time. The same headlines, the same narratives, the same carefully orchestrated outrage. I knew how it all worked now. I could spot the tricks, the manipulations, the half-truths spun into full-blown crises. And the worst part? No one else could. People believed it. They always had. They always would. Because that's how the system was designed, to feed you the truth in a way that makes you feel like you're in control, like you're informed, like you're thinking for yourself. But you're not. You're seeing what they want you to see. And now I was on the outside, watching it all unfold, powerless to stop it. At first, I thought about fighting back. Starting a blog, a podcast, something, anything to get the truth out. But I knew how that would end. I had seen it happen before. The moment I tried to speak, they'd discredit me, call me bitter, a liar, a disgruntled former journalist looking for attention. And then, if that didn't work, they'd make sure no one could find me at all. I had been erased quietly. Not in a dramatic way, not in some grand conspiracy-style takedown. Just quietly. My name no longer carried weight in the industry. My past work, my credibility, my reputation, gone. I was no one. And that's when I understood. It was never about silencing people. It was about making sure no one listened. Because what's more powerful than killing a story? making sure no one ever cares about it. So I stopped trying. I got a job doing freelance work, nothing serious, just content writing, editing, the kind of work that doesn't make waves. It pays the bills. It keeps me off the radar. But every now and then, I get the itch. To write. To tell the truth. To let people see what I saw. But then I remember. They wouldn't believe me anyway. Because the truth isn't about facts. It's about trust. And they control that too. I don't know why I'm telling you this. Maybe I just needed to say it out loud. Or maybe I needed someone to hear me. Because if you've made it this far, if you're still listening, then maybe you're starting to ask the same questions I did. Maybe you felt it too, that nagging feeling that something isn't right. That the stories you're being told don't quite add up. I used to trust the news. I used to believe in facts, in objectivity, in the idea that if you just looked hard enough, you'd find the truth. But the truth isn't buried under lies. It's buried under noise. Under headlines designed to make you feel instead of think. Under carefully crafted outrage, under the illusion of choice, under the comforting belief that you're the one deciding what matters. But are you? Think about the last time you clicked on a news story. Did you stop to question it? To check where the information came from? Or did you react? Did you feel angry, or scared, or vindicated? Because that's the game. It's not about keeping secrets. It's about controlling what you see, and how you see it. And now, I have to ask you, what do you believe? Do you think I made the right choice? Do you think I should have fought harder, risked everything to expose what I found? Or do you think it wouldn't have mattered? Because I'm not sure anymore. I walked away. I let them win. And sometimes, I wonder, if I had spoken out, if I had tried to fight back, would it have changed anything? Or would I have just been another name, another face, another story lost in the algorithm? I don't know. But I do know this. You're not as free as you think you are. And now that you know that, what are you going to do about it? Tell me. Tell me what you see, what you've noticed. Tell me if you've ever felt like the world was trying to push you in a certain direction. If you've ever caught a glimpse of something you weren't supposed to see. Because I know I'm not the only one. And maybe, just maybe, if enough of us start paying attention, they won't be able to erase us all.